everybody, and welcome back to the Radical Center. We are back once again to tell you all the things that we think about Canadian politics and provincial politics in Ontario. And I'm back here with Cody, my dear friend and my loyal co-host, who shows up every time and does not disappoint. Cody, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I mean, the weather, as we were just talking before we came on the air, the weather's not that great because of the smoke from the wildfire. But you know, summer's here.
I think this is our first weekend where it's like actually warm, and now we're dealing with wildfire smoke. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. This is what it's like to live in Canada. We love this country. Let's get right into it. A trade deal is within reach, according to Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. What do you think, Cody? Do you think Brian Lilley would know if there's a trade deal coming up?
I could understand why he's saying that. I mean, despite the public sentiment, I've remained relatively calm since even the famous Trump-Trudeau meeting. I think, and let's go back to, you had asked me a few episodes ago, I think it was when Carney first became leader, if Carney was going to be able to make a deal with Donald Trump. And the way I answered that was not really answering it, saying that, you know, Carney needs to make a deal with Donald Trump. I think that a deal between Trump and Carney is necessary because Carney was elected leader of the Liberal Party for this purpose. And access to the U.S. economy is crucial for Canada, especially with the G7 coming to Canada. Both leaders want to win, but I think Carney needs a win. And there are two things that are going on here, right? Carney's not retaliating from Trump's doubling of the aluminum and steel tariffs. And obviously it escalated a little bit because Trump doubled the tariffs on steel and aluminum. I think that this, on Trump's end, I think it's a tactic to pressure Carney into an agreement. And the lack of retaliation could suggest, like, I buy the argument that a deal is probably near. The other thing that I would say is that the media predictions regarding Trump's tariff policies have been largely incorrect. I'm speaking about Donald Trump. Donald Trump's popularity is relatively stable. The U.S. inflation has decreased, and nations that we incorrectly assume were going to come to our rescue are cutting deals with the United States. So that's what I think. I think that a deal, whether it's near or not, I don't know. I don't have any insight, but I can understand why Brian Lilley thinks that it is near.
Okay, and that's good analysis. Thank you for that, Cody. I will actually, leave it there if there's anything you'd like to add. That's very good analysis.
No, the only thing that I would say is, and one of the issues my gut feeling is the issue of fentanyl is what's been holding this thing up. Now, why is that? Well, contrary to what our government has been stating, Canada does have a problem with importing the precursors to fentanyl. Now, it hasn't been a huge issue in the past in comparison to Mexico, but because the Trump administration has cracked down on the southern border, what China used to do is they used to import the precursors to fentanyl into Mexico. The Mexican drug cartels would manufacture it, make fentanyl in Mexico, and they would smuggle it through the southern Mexican border. The FBI director, Kash Patel, was actually on the Joe Rogan podcast today. I was watching part of it before we came on. And what he said is now what's happening is China has to adapt and they have to pivot. So they're going to start sending more and more of those precursors either into Vancouver, where we have a problem with organized crime, or Mexican drug cartels are going to start smuggling it through Vancouver. Yeah. And you can talk to border agents. They know that this is a problem. So I think that a deal, I can understand the reasoning as to why people think that a deal is near. It's just, it's the fine details, in my opinion. Now we can move on.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, thank you again for that great analysis. Let's talk a little bit about the Conservative leader. He has fallen 13 points behind as preferred PM since Election Day. And Mark Carney continues to maintain a pretty strong lead. What do you think of this? I have a lot of opinions on this. So I won't leave it there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think Pierre's problem is now, post-election? We've talked a lot about Pierre's problems during the election, but what do you think his problem is post-election?
So he made it through the initial stage of, pushing away the question of whether he will continue on as being leader. Now what he faces is the same thing that Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer had faced after the previous election, and that is they were able to remain on as party leader, albeit for, months, but they were not able to keep the caucus together. So there's three things that I would say to that. I said, well, first, I'm not surprised that there's a downtick in support for him as a party leader because he just lost the election, right? And people are probably starting to disengage. What's more noteworthy, what I think, is that despite this dip, recent polls have actually shown that Conservatives slightly increased their support within margin of error, but they seem to be holding it. It just kind of suggests that while his personal numbers are fluctuating, the Conservative Party itself, they're holding their own. Mm-hmm. The second thing is individual leader popularity is a good tell, right? There's no doubt about that. I go back and we think about we're about a year. I can't believe it, but it's been a year since that Joe Biden and Donald Trump debate. Yeah. And what happened after that debate is not that Trump necessarily became more popular after that debate. Instead, many Democratic voters became demoralized and they were less likely to participate in polls. So what am I getting at here, right? Yeah. It's possible that we're seeing the same thing there, a temporary disengagement or whatever you would say. Finally, and then I'll let you talk, as a natural skeptic, I do find the timing of this particular poll quite interesting because this week it also came out from a poll from the former Liberal Party pollster Polera that highlighted that Doug Ford was the most recognizable premier. And while on the surface, this one poll all of in itself, it does seem like an indictment of Pierre, but obviously it's not good. But the one thing that I would say is that if my prediction holds true that Doug Ford would become the Conservative leader, should Patrick Brown resign, and Patrick Brown becoming Premier of Ontario and all that, then this poll does create a narrative to start that conversation, and it feels like it could be designed. I'm not making an assumption. I'm just saying, it could be to spark speculation. It could be to try and get that conversation going to see if somebody can topple the leader.
Mm-hmm. So here's where I'm at with this. I think it is rare for a leader to come back and do well after losing an election. I especially think it's rare, maybe even impossible, for a leader to come back and do well after losing their own seat in an election, right? There's something to be said about that. There's something to be learned from that. Conservative Party, much like the Ontario Provincial Party, the Ontario Liberal Provincial Party, refused to acknowledge that, which is fine. I understand why. It's very expensive to run leadership races. It's hard. It takes a lot of work. Political parties are exhausted. They run on volunteers and donations. No one wants to have a leadership race every 18 months. I get it. It's exhausting. But you have to accept that, the result may not be what you're hoping for it to be, right? People are starting to, forget the Trudeau legacy. They're starting to see Mark Carney as a different new prime minister. Sure, he's from the same party, but he sounds and looks and does everything completely differently than Trudeau. That's for sure, right? So it's almost like, it's a brand new government. Yes, a lot of the same faces are there. But even shook up cabinet. He shook up a lot of things. He got a new chief of staff. He's getting he has his own agenda that he's pushing through of what he thinks is best for the country. And I think, Pierre is just going to get lost in the shuffle, and he's just going to disappear into the background, especially without a seat. And, he's eventually going to get back in the House. And are people going to really pay attention to him? Is he going to be as obnoxious as he was during the previous term, which is what ended up, with him not having a seat to begin with, because people, his own constituents didn't want to hear him talking in the House anymore. So, there's a lot that time is going to tell, but I'm not surprised. I think this is expected. I don't think he will recover. I think he will continue to dwindle and potentially at some point hover around some, point, like much like the Ontario Liberal leader is hovering around, a certain number and not really be able to grow from that. And I think, I think his party will come to terms with that, and his supporters will have conversations with him and say, look, this ain't working. We have to do something different. This is what's in the best interest of the party. And then he'll probably resign or get pushed out. That's my prediction. I know it's way too early to say that. I could be entirely wrong, but not usually. But yeah.
Well, I can see where you're coming from, and I can understand what you're saying. As to whether he stays on or not, I don't really have a prediction because I just don't. I think only time will tell. I don't know. He has to be. The only way that he stays on is if he keeps enough members of his caucus in lockstep. And as long as he has enough people to stay on, then he'll stay on. As for
his caucus will turn against him because they want to win.
I don't know if they will, because
you think they'll prioritize him over winning their own seats? Look what happened to Jagmeet and his team.
Well, you have to look at it like this, okay? If I just got elected, if you're someone like Aaron Gunn, who came under significant fire for his past ordeals, we'll say. If you are a new member of the caucus and you just stole away a NDP or a Liberal seat because of Pierre Poilievre's message resonating with workers and young people and the demographics that they picked up, no, you wouldn't do that. Like someone like Arpen Khanna, who supported. Was a diehard Pierre Poilievre supporter throughout the entire leadership campaign. He was able to snatch up a seat in Oxford, and it's a safe Conservative seat. He will have a job for as long as he wants it. The next thing is yes, Pierre Poilievre lost. We all know that. But he didn't really lose by that much. I mean, there's fair criticisms of the way the campaign was run. I'm not ignoring that. But in all told, the Conservative Party's performance as a whole was not bad, despite all of Pierre Poilievre's misgivings. So I think I'll put it to you like this:
they did blow a significant lead, though.
They blew. Again,
they were supposed to
win
a different majority. He was supposed to have members everywhere.
Look, that was with Trudeau, right? The Liberal Party, they changed teammates halfway through the game.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that happened with Trump and Kamala. Like, Joe Biden was on track for a historic defeat. Yeah. Like, they were going to lose states like Minnesota and New Mexico and Virginia. And then Kamala got back in the race and made it a lot closer. So, I mean, it's not that I'm completely dismissing your arguments. It's that I'm saying that it's a smaller, I think it's a smaller piece of the pie. The biggest test for Pierre Poilievre for whether he can win the election or not is if he can continue to evolve, if he can continue to show Canadians that what the Liberals used to make the Conservatives out to be as these big scary monsters that were going to starve grandma and take away your rights. If he can do that, then he can win the next election. Because there's going to be a point in Carney's prime ministership where there will be scandals. There will be a point in his prime ministership. It's the cycle of politics. It all depends on the timing. So I think it's an open question. I think that this poll, while it is one poll, I think that it does start the conversation of saying, okay, are we really gonna stick with Pierre here? And that's an internal party discussion. I don't think that's something that's going to happen across the country.
No, and I agree with that. But we will see. Time will tell. My prediction. I'm holding on to my prediction. I just don't see the. I mean, I know there's been leaders who have been very successful who lost their first election. I get it, but I think it was different. It wasn't as personal. I think this was personal. I think he was rejected by people who really didn't like him, and who, the NDP walked away from their own party just to keep him out of government. That's hard to get over. You can't, in this country, with, having small parties that are always going to be at play, you can't come across as a threat to something or someone, because, people will unite under another banner just to keep you out. That's my opinion. We'll see how it goes. Let's move on to our next topic. The Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP have passed a motion asking the government to provide a budget before the spring session ends. What do you think of what's going on? Let's talk a little bit about the NDP. They voted against the throne speech. They're doing a lot for a party with very little seats. What do you think is going on with all these new theatrics that nobody's really paying attention to?
It is theatrics. I think it's. I think the NDP are trying to gain relevance.
In the wrong way, I would say.
in the wrong way. Look, unless the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP are going to hold a confidence motion to bring down the government, which they are not. The Bloc has already said that they're going to support the government for at least a year. So if those three of those parties don't come together and bring down the government, then this is not going to happen, right? And you can pass a motion, whatever, but it doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't do anything. It's the same thing with the throne speech. Like, I saw even in my Twitter feed that some conservative influencers and even members of the Conservative Party were saying that the government could fall because the throne speech was going to be a confidence vote and it was going to fail. And I'm like, what are they smoking?
I think Mark Carney would get a super duper majority if there was two elections less than 6 months apart, and and any party pulled that trigger.
Okay, I don't know about that. We won't get into that discussion, but just back to this.
You think Canadians are going to be okay with having two consecutive elections that are that close to one another? No way.
Well, no, they're not. But again, they're going to look at their pocketbook, and if Trump is not on the ballot, then what's Carney going to do? Like, he's got nothing. So far, he's got nothing.
Well, he's still talking about pocketbook issues. I don't know.
Yeah, but nothing's passing. Nothing. He hasn't had a chance to govern. I'll put it like that. How about that?
Yeah,
How about that? We'll do a draw and we'll say he hasn't had a chance to govern. Okay? Anyways.
Okay.
But, okay?
Continue on.
Back to what I was saying. And again, I had a few people message me and they said, "Are we going to have another election?" And I'm like, "No. I'll shave my eyebrows if we have another election, and I'll do it live on the podcast."
That would be fun.
There's not going to be another election. Okay. So yeah, that's what I think. I think you're right. It's theatrics. Again, the throne speech, really boring. It's just the government summing up its campaign message. The real test for the government is going to be confidence motions, which I think for the time being, they're going to skate through somehow, some way.
Yeah.
That's all I can say, really. There's not much to say.
I also think, the NDP specifically, I don't think they can afford another election. So I don't know if this is the time for them to be beating their chest. I think there's a time and place for everything. And I think there's a time and place for theatrics. There's a time and place for, taking a stand and standing your ground. There's a time and place to, vote against a government and bring it down. And this isn't the time for any of that. This is the time for people to just wind down after a long year where there's been too many elections, especially in Ontario, and be able to just enjoy the summer and get to the fall. With that said, let's talk a little bit about Ontario. Doug Ford says he is going to remove the crate around a statue of Canada's first prime minister. I think this is something we're probably going to disagree on. What do you think?
Well, that topic and the next topic are kind of the same, right? Because the next topic we're also going to talk about is that Doug Ford or PCs will pass a bill preventing school boards from renaming historical figures. So why don't we just deal with it all at once? How about that?
Sure. As someone who was on a school board who renamed the school.
Exactly. Look,
this is my jam.
Yeah. Again and again, I come on here and I say that there are days where I really like what Doug Ford does, and there are days where I have strong disagreements. However, today is drum roll. It's going to be one of those days where
which way is it gonna go?
Which way am I going to go? Today is a day where I genuinely support both of these moves. Look, Canada is a great country. We have not always lived up to her promise, but we learn and we move on. And I believe that taking down statues and renaming things that doesn't fix broken parts of our past or teach our children about them. For me, sometimes it feels like we focus too much on erasing parts of our history rather than learning from them. And I think that by removing or renaming whatever these historical figures, that we risk making it harder for future generations to see and to fully understand the good, the bad, and sometimes the truly difficult. See, to me, and we've talked about patriotism before on this podcast, and true patriotism to me is partly facing that history head on. And I think that we need to teach our children how to look at figures like John A. Macdonald, understand that they are he anyways was the father of Confederation. He built the foundation of this country. And besides the point, if you're somebody who disagrees with him just purely as a historical figure, I think that vandalism and stuff like this, the reason why the crate is up, should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Mm-hmm. So what do you think, Noka?
I'll tell you my perspective, and I've spent a lot of time at a school board talking about these issues. I have a lot of opinions on this, so I hope our listeners will bear with me, because there's a lot of ideas bouncing in my head and I want to make sure I articulate them properly. I'm going to start off, we could talk about the issues together, but I want to start off with talking about the school boards and the move to a bill to stop school boards from renaming schools. School boards have a lot of problems that the provincial government doesn't deal with, right? I am the first person to advocate to stop electing school board trustees. I'm on record saying that. I'm a former elected school board trustee who advocates to stop electing school board trustees. And there's reasons for that, and we can have a whole conversation on that. But I'm on the record, in the radio, on TV, in print, on Twitter, everywhere, advocating for that. So I'm not saying that school boards are, the greatest decision makers of all. But what I am saying is that there are much more significant issues at school boards that the province needs to deal with, and they need to deal with them head on, instead of just making up policies about, school naming, right? For God's sakes, there's school board trustees who name schools after themselves. If you're worried about naming schools, why don't you first, do something about that? So that's one thing. And in fact, actually, a high percentage of schools in certainly in Peel, maybe not across the province because I haven't surveyed all of them, but certainly in Peel are named after school board trustees and senior staff. So if you're worried about the naming of schools, maybe first focus on who they are naming schools after, and not so much about, should we have a debate in public education about, whose name should belong on a school and should be celebrated on a school. The second part of this conversation, specifically about John A. Macdonald or any other historical figure, I I agree with everything that you said, every single thing. We have a responsibility to teach the next generation about the dark parts of our history. We also have a responsibility to teach our children that people are complicated and they do good things and they do bad things, and that we have to understand that people exist within the context of their time. However, that doesn't mean we need to celebrate them. Statues, school buildings, naming things after people, that's celebration. That's not a history lesson. That's not a history class. That's a celebration. That's, honoring someone. That's looking up to someone, right? And my perspective on this is, as a country, we have to decide if we want to actually have real reconciliation with Indigenous communities and First Nations people, or we don't. Like, we have to decide this. We can't just keep, pretending that we want to have reconciliation, but oh no, we're going to be absolutely horribly offended if we can't put, this prime minister from like hundreds of years ago, his name on a school, who is completely irrelevant to our time today. Not entirely irrelevant, but doesn't necessarily need to be celebrated or seen as this great achiever of everything. That's my perspective. I don't see statues or schools being named after people as a history lesson. And I think, I don't remember this correctly, but I'm pretty sure this was my quote. I said something, this isn't about erasing history. History doesn't need to be displayed on a school sign. It's not necessary. We can name schools after things that are relevant to kids in their lives, people that they actually look up to. One of the biggest things that I worked on was diversifying names of schools in Peel, because we have a huge diverse population. And why are schools named after mostly school board trustees? right? Like the kids don't connect with those names. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of who we are as a nation. But I think these culture wars we get into are quite honestly not helpful for anything. And Doug Ford, I often agree with Doug Ford. I think people know that. I think Doug Ford knows that. But he's starting, he got to be careful with this. Don't take a right turn, man. Like, don't take a right turn. The reason why you've been getting elected, you've been the premier forever, and you can be the next premier for the premier for the next 150 years if you want, is because you're a centrist. You've been in the center, right? Don't get into this stuff. This is the Pierre Poilievre stuff that got him, kicked out of people's living rooms because they didn't want to hear him talking anymore, right? Doug, if you're listening to this, don't make a right turn. You don't need that. Focus on everyday people's problems. Focus on pocketbook issues. Focus on delivering services. That's the stuff people care about. That's why they keep voting for you. Nobody wants to hear that stuff. There's too many opinions on these issues, and you're never going to get everybody to be happy. And to be quite honest, it's not worth it. It's just a statue. Like, in all honesty, as a country, we've got to be defined by more than just a statue. Like, we have to have a stronger identity as a nation, as people that are tied to one another, that love this country. So I don't know. That's my opinion. I'm pretty passionate about this. So thank you all for listening, and thank you, Cody, for indulging me.
Yeah, the whole reason why this is an issue is because the statue keeps on getting denigrated. It keeps on getting vandalized. And it's not right-wing extremists that are saying we hate John A. Macdonald. It's the left. And what I think Doug Ford is saying is, look, we're going to take down the crate and we're going to display the statue that has always been there. We can have a debate later over whether it stays. But if that crate comes down and somebody vandalizes it again, I hope that person is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. When it comes to the culture wars, it's not the right that's doing this. It's people from the fringes of the left. Now, not to say people on the fringes of the right don't do bad things, but that's where we are. So I think we will obviously agree to disagree on this one, as we often do on some of these issues.
I agree that vandalism is a bad thing and people should be punished for it. That's for sure. But I also think, nothing good is going to come out of this for Doug Ford. He's opening up a can of worms that I don't think he's going to be able to manage very well when there's more conversations around it, when perhaps something does happen to the statue and there's more conversations around it, and then and then he has to have he has to make statements on it and all these kinds of things. And now, to double it up with the whole your bill to not remove names for historical figures, that's telling you where he's going with this, right? This isn't a guy, this isn't a situation where he's like, oh, we just don't want this statue to be vandalized. That's not what he's saying. When he's saying we don't want to take names off of historical figures, we don't want to take names of historical figures off of schools, and we're going to put a bill to stop trustees from being able to do that, he's taking a side. What I'm saying is, Doug, get out of this conversation. You don't need to be in it. That's not why people voted for you. That's not why people like you. Get the hell out of this conversation and focus on the stuff that makes you popular and has made you popular this whole time.
We could go on and on and on. Like, we could go back and forth for so long on this one.
I know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is it for today. This is our podcast. If we'll be back again next week. Well, are we back next? We are back next week.
Yes. But we had discussed earlier that
times.
Yeah, July 4th, just a Friday, and June in the order.
Yeah.
June 27th, July 4th, we're going to be taking a break. There will be no podcast.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a break and needs time to recuperate sometimes. So
yeah.
We're again
about other times as well where we might also take some break. It is summertime, so we like everybody else like to enjoy our summers. So cool. Well, I hope you have a great night, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
Take care.